Hello and welcome to Mixed Extents. I'm Mark Wilkinson. With me today, as always, Anthony, Organic SEO Nocentino, and Andrew, I'm in your search results Prusky. Today's guests are Pam Lahoud. She's the goddess of all things SQL, except BI, of course. She is a SQL 2008 Microsoft Certified Master, over 20 years of experience, and is currently a principal program manager in the Azure Data SQL Server group at Microsoft. With us as well is John Martin. He's a data platform MVP and a consultant, and he does data stuff. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about high availability and disaster recovery.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to stop it. Like, where did you come up with that for me? Because that makes me sound really creepy.
So anytime I search for anybody, like if I search my name or I search Anthony's name, Andrew's name comes up in the search results on the first page.
Right.
If I search for anything related to me, even blog post titles that I know that I wrote, Andrew's name comes up. Sometimes
because I've linked to. That's because I've linked to your blog posts. That's why.
All right, but anyways,
Not creepy.
yeah. So today we're talking about high availability and disaster recovery. Before I get started, though, I do want to announce that we have a schedule now for the next 8KB. So head on over to 8kb.online for that. The next event is going to be January 27th, starting at 1400 GMT. So check out the website for our schedule.
Could have done it with a little bit more vigor. It's like, hey, we're back. We are back. Come on now.
I'm excited.
The
Hey,
website has
2021 as well.
exclamation points.
So it's
Hey,
not
the
gonna
schedule for 8KB is out. Why don't you go check it out?
Ouch.
Man. Well, you can tell from Andrew's enthusiasm that we're all very excited about the event. All right, so on to the questions.
We're recording a webinar here, aren't we?
We are, yeah.
I think so.
Kind
Oh,
of.
is that what this is?
It
Is
is,
that
kind
we're
of.
having coffee and talking.
All right, so our beginning question here that I think came from Anthony. So, and this is open for anybody except for Anthony and Andrew.
But that's not everybody then.
So that's two of the three people on the call.
Yeah. So let's say you walked into a new SQL Server environment today and found that they had absolutely no HADR plan whatsoever. So where do you start, and what do you think is the most important thing when planning for that?
I think the most important thing is to ask them what their requirements are. Like what would happen if this SQL server went down tomorrow? How fast would you have to be up? And how much data could you lose before you lose your job?
Right.
Or pain ensues. Those are the first questions you want to answer. And if the answer is, I don't need to be up until the next day and I can lose a fair bit of data, then the answer is log shipping.
That's very
Wow.
definitive. Okay, let's dig into that one a little bit.
I've never had, every time I've asked that to typically management people, they always say, we can't lose any data though. No data. Absolutely
I like
nothing.
it when they say we can't lose any data, because you just know that you're getting at least 6 zeros, because that's the only way to even think about achieving that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's the other thing. It's like, because that's always the first answer, right? We can't lose any data and we have to be up immediately. Okay. Let me get my checkbook out. How much do you?
How many commas are in this price?
Right.
Did you get your checkbook out and just every point they make, you just add a zero to the end of it? Is that where we...
Yeah.
Okay.
The best one I've found with it, we can't lose any data. It's like, okay, so you're going to architect your applications with retry logic then, because you're going to lose anything in flight.
Mhm.
And they're like, what?
Yeah, that retry logic is a thing, right? Because, I mean, especially back in the day when failover cluster was like everyone's primary HA, it's like, okay, we built a failover cluster, we're done now, right? Everything's just going to work. And then they have their first failover and they're like, well, the application's down. What's going on? It's like, did you think about retry logic? Because, just because your SQL server's back up doesn't mean everything else is working, right?
Exactly. It's moved. And it kind of forgot about everything that it was doing, and it's like, what do you want me to do now? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the bit that people always forget, in my view. It's crazy.
That's definitely true. I mean, there's high availability at every level. You can't just look
Mhm.
at the hardware. You can't just look at SQL Server. You can't just look at the OS. You have to look at the whole stack.
Yeah.
And if there's one point of failure anywhere in the stack, then you don't have high availability. So,
Exactly. So I mean, currently what I'm looking at is the default position for that I'm recommending in well, I say predominantly virtualized environments, whether it's Hyper-V or whether it's VMware, is okay. Well, are you willing to go for mitigate for an OS corruption? And they're like, yeah, they're just not too fussed about that. Well, fine. Then the HA in the virtualization layer is typically good enough for most sort of non-critical stuff. It's like it's going to appear over there, so long as you've not completely foobarred the OS,
Mhm.
which is why it comes back to sort of doing things like snapshots. But then you get into all the fun and games of, well, we've run RDMs into VMware or whatever, and we can't take snapshots, so we need all of this, and it's just like, what?
but if you're in
Defaults for the win.
virtualization and you're using that for HA, what do you do when you need to patch the OS?
Just patch it and bounce it, because let's face it, how many businesses are truly 24/7 365?
Yeah.
Right.
That's just something that a lot of people don't put into this. Like, oh, it's got to be up all the time. It's like, but it's okay. You've got batch processing windows and you've got this, but what are you doing the rest of the time? Unless you are 24/7, in which case, if you've not architected something that is essentially follow the sun or follow your user base, then
Mhm.
you're not you're making compromises, and that's what it's all about. And as you move up into sort of from on-premises systems into cloud-based systems, following the sun becomes a whole lot easier to build,
Mhm.
especially as you move to sort of serverless architectures with the application layer and things like that.
I remember being in a meeting with a load of senior management people, me and the senior DBA I was working with at the time, and they were saying we need to be up 24/7, 365 days a year. There is no, we have no plan for any controlled outages. And the DBA just sat there and went, well, you're not going to get any controlled outages, but I guarantee you're going to get some uncontrolled outages.
Yeah.
Sure. Right. I mean, there's always something that you didn't plan for, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole point, isn't it? It's
Yeah, so
easy
it's
to work around the plan stuff.
and that's what I find interesting, and especially as a consultant. I'm brought in, basically SQL Server architecture ish, and I'll kind of branch out into application architecture ish. But like across the board, is it everyone's experience that for whatever reason this kind of seems to let this high availability like planning kind of lands in our lap as data professionals, right?
Yeah, well, because I mean, it's like you said, everyone knows the data is important, right? So it's always everyone's answer. We can't lose the database. It always has to be up. The applications will do what they will, but that database better be there when those applications are ready. And I think there's very few people that are thinking about the whole stack. And I
Mhm.
also think that it tends to be technology focused, not business focused. So it's
Mhm.
like we want to use availability groups. We're gonna roll out availability groups. Well, are you going to use that readable secondary for anything? Nah. Well, do you need 2 copies of the data? Nah, we're backing it up all the time. We're fine. What's your window for coming back up? We don't need to be back up except within 4 hours. It's like, why are you doing that to yourself?
It's like, so I'll teach availability group design sessions to customers. And the first design point that I go through with AGs is don't, right?
Yeah.
And I
What's
say
wrong
it
with
kind
you,
of
Anthony?
right. I say it kind of flippantly like that, even when I'm teaching them. Like, because if you have good automation and good defined recovery practices, chances are you can meet your recovery objectives without all this cool stuff. Right. And it's a lot simpler to support.
Right.
Yeah.
And I get that it's like the new thing. New.
It's finally fully usable.
New
after
S
60.
thing, maybe. But I get that
finally
it's cool. Yeah, I get that it's cool technology and, but in some cases it is a lot to manage, like you said. There's a lot of network traffic. So if you've got a really busy OLTP system, you're sending a ton of traffic across that network. And you better be doing it for a good reason. I mean, I don't want to downplay availability groups. It's great technology, and it's probably the fastest failover you can get on a SQL server, right? Because it's much faster than failover clustering because the database is hot on the other side. So, I mean, there's so much that's great about that technology, but if you don't need it, it's a lot to manage. Especially like folks, trying to do index rebuilds and things like that. Like that can be a challenge. It makes things a lot more complicated. And I was joking about log shipping earlier, but I kind of not joking. Like in some cases, if log shipping just works for you, if it fits into your SLAs, it is so simple. It is so easy to manage. It is not prone to failure. If your backups are succeeding and you can copy to a network share, your log shipping is just going to work. And so, everyone thinks of it as old technology, but it's reliable and it's simple, and it's still a viable option for some people if you have very relaxed SLAs.
Well, I mean, even then, you look at log shipping, you're validating your backups you're taking because you're automatically restoring them. But also, if you go out that layer from the SQL Server and up into DNS, and you put DNS aliases in there as well, you're almost making the failover of it transparent to the applications as well when you start bringing things online, and you just flip you make sure you've got a low TTL and do all the work there. And there's a lot less moving parts. I mean, the thing that really annoys me about availability groups is that people go, they're amazing, and let's cookie cutter and use them for everything. And well, we're going to go cross-site, and it's like, okay. And so there's one environment I worked in, and we got 2 nodes in the primary site, 2 nodes in the secondary site, and the file share witness on a third site, but they can't triangulate traffic through the third site to the secondary replicas, which means you lose that site-to-site link, and it's just like, who's going to go live? Who's going to grab the file share and all this? And you end up with so much complexity there, and it's insane. It's my preferred option there is walking it all the way back and saying, well, we'll do a 2-node AG protected by SRM to the remote site. So if we lose the primary one, we just turn the whole damn thing on over there.
Yeah.
Plus backups.
And that's really the point, is like complexity just for the sake of complexity kind of violates that whole HADR thing, because now if the environment is so fragile that you can't rely on it, then how good is your HADR strategy? So it's really, I mean, that's why the very first question you asked, I said, I'm going to ask them what their requirements are, not what technology do you want to use. I'm not going to lead with, do you want to use AGs or failover clusters? I'm going to lead with, what do you really need? What does your environment look like? And let's pick the technology that matches those requirements, rather than molding our requirements around what the technology can do or what it can't do. And I don't want to downplay AG so much, because I mean, they're great, they're amazing, especially when you get up into Azure, where doing shared disk can become a challenge. So clustering is not so easy. And availability groups is such a great option up there. It just makes things easier. So it's a great technology, but it comes with complexity, it comes with management overhead. So you want to make sure you're making those choices for the right reasons.
Exactly. That can be absolutely the problem with some DBA sometimes. They're like, it's the new cool thing. Let's do the new cool. Oh, by the way, bonus points for John for using the word triangulate. Awesome stuff.
Right?
But yeah, I often feel like a lot of it is like, this new cool thing is out. Let's implement that. Let's go with that, because that is, what.
It's the shiny, and we must have it.
It's the shiny tech syndrome.
No,
absolutely.
I want something that I don't have to think about, because if I don't have to think about it, it means it's not going to go off at 3 a.m. and get me out of bed.
There you go.
And it never seems to be 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. It always seems to be 3 o'clock on a Sunday for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, and the last thing you want to find out when you have a disaster is that your disaster recovery solution is fragile, and oh shoot, like, my database went down and my AG happened to be 4 hours behind. Well, so much for that tight SLA, right? So.
Well, to follow on that point, then, so this is a big thing. Like, you write the plan, you write good tests, and you've gone through, right? You've gone through maybe a couple, what are those things called? Drills, right? Failover tests and things like that. How do you help manage change, right? I think that's a big part of understanding it, either change in data size, change in technologies, developers to deploy new features. Like, how can, like, what's
new features?
I know I was going to
totally say developers do stupid stuff.
Yes. I got caught.
I'm sure they're saying the same thing about the DBAs.
Yeah.
For any
Yeah,
developers
but-
watching or listening, he didn't mean it. He's very sorry.
Please don't unfollow me on Twitter. But I think that's a big part. Is like how do we manage change as data professionals to keep these systems stable, right?
Mhm.
Experience, most people don't.
Mhm.
It just gets there, it grows, and then it kicks them in the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's, because I mean, the big problem there is not so much, oh, we need to change our processes, we need to change, it's anything that's going to have a sort of monetary value on it. You try to get in sort of any form of business buy-in. It's like, well, is this going to save us money? Well, maybe it won't let you go out of business. You know, doesn't it's not that's never a compelling argument for them. It's you go in there and say, well, high availability, disaster recovery, and the evolution of these. It's basically insurance. Are you paying insurance for your business? Well, yes. Well, then give me some money so I can do this. It's a lot of things. It takes a major event for people to be galvanized into actually doing
Mhm.
something that
Yeah.
that saves their bacon. And a lot of the time, it comes down to the teams on the ground busting a gut to get the systems up and running again. And then the sort of post-event analysis is, well, yeah, we should have done this thing that the team recommended 18 months ago.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
Malware is a big one. I remember that early on in my career is
Oh,
that I remember sitting in a conference room with the CIO, like, and I was barely awake because I'd been up for 2 days. And I'm
Mhm.
like, we have to have a patch strategy, or else we're gonna have this conversation again. This is 2002, like where we're gonna be having this conversation again. And that's another big element, right? That people neglect is to think about is it's not just like server hardware, but this other thing that came along and did something bad to your system, like a malware, right? And having to blow back, several hundred database, like, that's time, and it's all impacts your business.
well, that comes back
Yep.
to what Pam was saying about the complexity of environments as well. Is the more complex your HADR configuration, if you've got to, I mean, you look at someone like Maersk who had to basically rebuild their entire infrastructure.
Mhm.
If you've got a horrifically complex HADR infrastructure underneath, that's going to slow down your ability to bring everything back online if you're building to the same spec. Or if
Yeah.
you're doing quick and dirty, you've then got a secondary task of bringing all of that capability back online.
Mhm.
So, again, it's
Yeah.
another a key thing for keeping it simple.
That was
Yeah,
like kind of the court. Oops, sorry, go ahead, Pam.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it just brings up a great point that when people are designing their disaster recovery solution or their high availability solution, they're thinking about how they do backups, how they do replication, how they do HADR, whatever. They're not thinking about how they're going to recover in the event of a disaster. And that's really, I mean, honestly, you start there and you work backwards. I mean, that's really how people should be thinking about it. It's like, not how am I backing all this up? How am I going to recover all this? How am I going to restore all this? How long is that going to take? And then
Right.
envisioning that can allow you to work backwards and say, okay, this is the right technology for me because the recovery solution works with my business, it works with my applications, it works with the personnel I'll have available. I mean, I remember when I was a premier field engineer, we were doing these like disaster recovery assessments. And one of the things we were saying is, you need to make sure that the summer intern can pick up your recovery document and execute it. Because in the time of a disaster, you don't know who's going to be available, who's going to be online, who's going to be doing that. And nobody has time to think. And there's so much heat at that time that it needs to be bulletproof, that plan. And so start there and then work backwards from there. And the technology should become evident from how you envision that experience.
This was something we were talking about recently, where I was not recently when I was last year. I do a chaos engineering session, and I was talking to the room and saying, who here works on a team where there's one person who is the source of all knowledge for one particular system? They've installed it, they maintain it, they fix any issues with it. If that system goes down and that person isn't there, what happens with that system? Do the rest of the team have access to, say, internal documentation to fix that issue? Or do they have say like ADS runbooks or things like that where they can get that knowledge? If they don't have that knowledge, what do you think is going to happen? Because it's basically a law of IT at this point, where when it actually does crash badly, that person will not be available to you at all. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like
But also, you want to be the person that also gets to go on vacation, right? Because I mean, I know when I worked in a small shop, I was a DBA in a small shop. I was going to Japan. I was literally at the airport getting ready to go on the plane, and my boss is like, where's this? Where's that? What's that? And I was like, I left you a document. Like, this is okay. I talked to everyone. It's all okay. I can get on this plane. You know, it's like if you don't have that in place, you are tied to your
You
job.
didn't do the hi yet. You break it.
Right.
RTFM. Bye. Yeah, I mean, I've worked in some environments in the past where we've actually, and it's quite morbid having to plan for, well, I might not be able to recover this system because I might not be here.
Mhm.
So depending on the industry you work in and where your place of work is, that's a very real thing that you need to start considering.
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah, and
some environments like that. I've
It's
also worked
the metaphorically hit by a bus plan. If that
See, I
makes
like to
yeah.
I like to say
pulled out
win the
sky
lottery.
plans on my place of work.
There you go. Win the lottery. There you can put
Win,
Right.
that's a lot better. That's a lot
Yeah.
better, actually.
on
Yeah.
a beach in Hawaii drinking pina coladas, not
Right.
going to answer my cell phone.
Oh,
Oh,
your
no,
database.
I would be answering the phone and I would be like, FaceTime, hey, check this out. Not there. Goodbye.
That does seem to be a bit of a pickle.
Yeah. Good luck.
Even for me as a consultant, like that's a very practical matter because I'm only ever going to be a single person consultant. That's how I design my business. And I can't provide 24/7 services. And
Right.
it's impossible. So even when I build solutions and I recommend AGs to customers, if the requirements are there, I spend a good chunk of the time, establishing the requirements, but also training. This is how you do these things. And I need everyone to understand what happens when the instance goes from here to here and what are the things that you need to look for and test for and automate and things like that. So it's you don't want to be a dependency in the platform, to say the least.
What makes me laugh at the moment are the number of people in businesses and things like that that are saying, well, we'll just put it in the cloud and that will solve all of our problems because it works.
Ooh, we have a whole bucket of cloud questions. Are we ready to go there?
Oh, yeah, sure. Go. I was going to say, like, I mean, the first thing, like you said, we'll go to the cloud and we don't need to worry about HADR anymore.
The marketing material says this. It's like, yeah, it's
So
really great as a service, but you need to put some thought into it.
Yeah. Well, I guess one thing I'm interested in is, let's say you're not going to move your tier one apps to cloud for whatever reason. You're still going to run on-prem. What are the DR design patterns that you're seeing commonly out in the field? Like, if you like, the most common thing I see, honestly, is just replicating backups into Azure or some other cloud service to have them offsite. Like, or what else outside of that? Like, what are you guys seeing?
No, I mean, it's back up on site, replicated to secondary site, and potentially sent off to the cloud as a fallback. I mean, there's still a lot of businesses still putting tapes in a box and sending it to Iron Mountain.
Yeah, it runs the gamut. And then you've also got stuff like Azure Site Recovery services, which I feel like not enough people leverage that. It's pretty cool. I mean, you're basically taking a whole VM image and shipping that to Azure. And then if you have a disaster, you can just spin the whole thing up in Azure, worst case scenario.
I think a lot of people don't realize that actually works with more than just Hyper-V.
Yeah, you can do it with...
It's with VMware.
Yeah, I don't know what the magic is behind that, but man, that is some cool technology, and it can protect SQL Server databases as well using VDI. I mean, it's like, it's really a compelling kind of hands-off DR solution. So there's stuff like that. We're starting to see some hybrid environments, some customers doing AGs with replicas in the cloud or block shipping to the cloud. Mostly that's, I think, to migrate into the cloud, especially for VM. The creating a distributed availability group seems to be the option of choice for cutting over into the cloud in a way that's relatively low downtime. So I'm seeing some stuff like that. Also, I know I work for Microsoft. It's maybe a little bit of a plug, but if you have software assurance, you've got all these great benefits where you can run. I mean, you can now pay for one primary on-prem instance. You get one free DR, one free HA on-prem. So that means one synchronous replica, one asynchronous replica on-prem, plus an asynchronous DR replica in Azure. You get all three of those for free. So you pay for one instance and you get 4 replicas.
The second that was announced, I sent many emails to many customers saying, do this because it's
right?
literally free, right?
If you just want to check that DR box, that multi-site DR box, put your DR replica in Azure. I don't want to say it's completely free. The SQL Server licensing is free.
True.
You're going to pay for the compute,
Yes.
but it's kind of a no-brainer to do something like that. That's a super easy way to get multi-site without having to, stand up a whole separate data center.
Yeah, because the huge blocker there was if you had 24 cores of enterprise on-prem, that's a right.
Right. That's
Yeah.
a hefty, now it's all free. Like, to me, that is a no-brainer. The compute is a drop in the bucket compared to the SQL licensing.
Mhm.
So the customers you're seeing that with, how are they handling connectivity? Because a lot of people still like, do we go down the express route sort of path, or do we stick with sort of more tried and tested VPN type technologies? And it's getting a lot
I
of
think
people
most of our customers that are doing that are probably express route because they're enterprise level customers.
That's because that's where I'm at the moment. We're looking at plumbing in express route because we can start relatively small and then start pumping a huge amount of data out there. Because you look at things like the latest Pure technology for their arrays, they're integrating more and more with the ability to do stuff in the storage in the cloud itself as well. So it's one of those that, and most of the backup appliances, these things like the Cahistes and the Rubrics and stuff like that, store very little on premises and also ship their secondary storage off to the cloud. And that's an interesting sort of thing as well. That's changing it. So you've got the old sort of Commvaults and the Veritases that are somewhat dinosaurs in the sort of backup and recovery space. And you look at.
Sorry, I just shuddered when you said Commvault. Right.
Right.
It's evil. That's my personal opinion, just in case you're looking for
don't hold back. Tell us what you really feel.
That's the point of the show.
A lot of these, you think about their charging models are archaic. It's like you need a license for this and a license for that. And if you're using dedupe and compression, you need to license all of this as well. And it's like, whatever, go away.
That's the Oracle model, right?
Yeah.
So, people that are using hybrid models with like replicas in the cloud, what are they doing wrong still? Like, are there common mistakes people make when they try to set a system like that up?
Go ahead, John. Yeah.
The key thing I see most people forgetting to do is put the supporting infrastructure up there.
Networking.
We're not going to bother putting domain controllers up there when they're running VMs. I'm like, it's not a great idea. It's all of those supporting services because they think, it's online, it's reliable. We've got this connection and it does this and it's great. And it's like, no. Make sure you put all the supporting infrastructure around it because it's more than just, as we've said a few times, it's more than just the databases that you need to look at from a high available disaster recovery scenario. You need to facilitate all of that authentication and everything. And there's various different options when you're up there. So
there's absolutely no point in just replicating your SQL instances up there. Nobody can connect to them, but they're online in the cloud. Right?
It's there.
It's right back to that other conversation. Is that two things? One, what are you going to do if you actually do have to fail over? What's your plan there? And HADR is not just the database; it's the whole application, it's the whole infrastructure. So that's incredibly important. Is thinking through, what if I actually had to fail over to Azure? How would that work? What would that look like?
So how do you take the applications up there? Can the applications handle having the databases so far away with the latencies involved? All of that sort of thing. So you've got some applications which are incredibly latency sensitive when they're talking to the database layer. But then the funniest one I ever saw was one company I did some work with. They had two physical data centers, and it's all well and good, and okay. So when it all fails over there, we lose the primary site. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, but they were a hosting provider. They didn't have an internet connection into the secondary site. The internet connection came in through the primary site across the site-to-site link, and it's like, well, you lose that site. How do you? And you see very similar sort of configurations up in the cloud where people span either through VPN or through ExpressRoute into VNets, and then it's a case of, okay, well, how are you going to facilitate external access into those resources if that's what you're looking at as well? A lot of people don't, because they just view it as a logical extension of their networks, which fundamentally it is. But if you
Mhm.
lose that link and the inbound internet connectivity, how are you
Mhm.
facilitating that for the applications and things like that that
Mhm.
people need to get to? And those applications then obviously speak to the database tier. So it's again
It,
just supporting infrastructure, supporting capabilities.
Mhm.
So
it's an extension, but it needs to be standalone at the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah.
You need
And
to
to piggyback off that, perf testing is another thing that I think people overlook for two reasons. One, obviously, if you actually had to fail over, that thing needs to perform just as well as your primary does. But also, if you're using something like availability groups, that secondary replica will not be able to keep up if it doesn't have the right IO throughput behind it, if it doesn't have enough cores. Like, it really needs to match the primary system as closely as possible. Otherwise, your replication is going to get behind, and if you actually had to run there, you might be in trouble if you have to run there for extended period of time.
So that's an interesting topic you say there as well, is that it's got to mirror what you've got on premises, and that's not always as easy to do when you're constrained with the offerings for the virtualization layer and the
Right.
IaaS stuff in Azure, because
Mhm.
obviously you want the throughput. Then you're going to have to sort of put a little bit more thought into, well, how am I laying out the storage to achieve the same thing on premises that I may have a SAN backing or whatever. You've got you've got good performance up in Azure, but you need to put some thought in. Well, we need to make the disks larger so we get the right size of disk and the right I/O throughput and the right class of VM,
Mhm.
because it's not just amount of memory and it's not just core count. It's class of machine, size of disks, type of disks, all of that sort of stuff that goes into it as well.
That is our number one challenge in Azure, and you wouldn't think that that's an HADR challenge. However, if you look at our case volume, a large percentage of our high availability and disaster recovery cases are because of IO throttling, because the IO gets throttled so badly that it causes the AG to fail over. So, I mean, it is incredibly important to look at that IO and throughput, because when you're on-prem, you just don't think about it the same way. You're right. You
Mhm.
buy a SAN, it's fancy, it does everything. It's
Five
super
channel.
fast. Yeah, you don't have to think about it. You get up to Azure and you're like, you have to buy IOPS and throughput. You don't just buy storage, you buy, bandwidth.
so that IO throttling is interesting though, because that's like, so you're saying it's a high volume uh case causer for that. And
Yeah, it's a case
but
driver. It's one of our highest case drivers. Yeah.
so
Capping.
what is
Sorry, I'm supposed to call it capping, not.
how does that percolate back out into like
Percolate.
Percolate. Yeah. Man.
what I'm getting at is observability, right? How do I see that very easily as a DBA, right? Because that's going to be something that we want to monitor for. And so how do you correlate the event in the infrastructure up into the actual data tier so that I can either see it happening or hopefully prevent it from happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. From a SQL VM perspective, you can just do the things you normally do. Look for latency, look for
Mhm.
queuing and things like that. So you can do that just through perfmon or through
Okay.
even through like DMIL file stats or something like that. Something that monitors latency. From an Azure layer, there are new throttling capping metrics. So you can set that up using Azure Monitor. So you can see if you're getting throttled at the VM level.
Yeah, cool. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. Honestly, I've had a task to blog about it for a couple months now that I keep snoozing. One of these days I'll get this done. There's some great articles. Actually, there was just I think it was on the MCM alias. There was some questions about there used to be a really great blog about IO throttling and caching and how that works in VMs in Azure. And it disappeared. We're getting that into the documentation now. So there's some really great documentation that's being produced now to talk about how IO capping works, how caching works, how those things work together, the capping limits and stuff like that, as well as those new metrics. So there's some good stuff. So I promise a blog will will be forthcoming about that. But I mean, that conversation is really important, because for HADR, the other side of it, and we used to talk about this a lot, is that it's not just the disaster recovery, it's not just the availability group or the log shipping or the backup or the cluster. it's also, is your database performing well? Because it's not performing well, it's not available.
Right.
So there's definitely a whole aspect of performance monitoring and tuning in your HADR plan, just to make sure that that database service is up and reliable.
Right. It's like, well, the database is up, but there was a lock on the customer table. We couldn't add new customers, right?
Right. Right. Like if your
That's not
application doesn't
online.
work, it doesn't matter if the service is running and the data is there. It's the app can't use it. Yep.
It's interesting you say that the I/O side of things is one of the key drivers for cases. One of the big headaches I've seen when using IaaS up in Azure is taking backups of the databases effectively, and it's like it's a perfect case backup to URL. That's great. But if you're using the wrong class of VM, you've got some serious network bandwidth issues going out to Azure Storage, and that's where you end up seeing backup times actually spike and increase compared to running it on premises. And again, it's another thing that people just don't seem to take into account. So it's interesting to see that versus things like the Azure Backup offering for VMs, and the various different trade-offs that you need to look at there. And whilst you can optimize some of it, you still, if you're going out the network point on the VM, you've got some limitations there for pushing anything if you've got some big data.
Yep. And that's another thing we've actually had customers cause failures. They run a backup, they hit the throttling limit, causes the AG to fail over. So the whole thing is tied together. Backups can definitely be a challenge in Azure, and that's one of our major focus areas for, because I handle both storage engine area and VMs. So there's this nice confluence of focus there, of really trying to address backups in Azure VMs so that they are less impactful to the VM, particularly because just IO is at such a premium in Azure. People are not thinking, people are just in this mindset of, I need 4 terabytes of space. Let me just attach a P50 to my SQL Server and I'm done. It's like, no.
Cha-ching.
Yeah. But not only that, but a P50 only has, like 250, 300 megabytes of throughput or something like that. Like, I mean,
when I
it's
first got started in Azure, I was like looking at the disk. I was like, huh? And then I learned, about striping and things like that across multiple virtual disks. So, right.
yeah.
And it makes sense. Honestly, we've been trying to do it for years physically at the data tier. We just can handle it actually physically in the storage tier.
So one of the fun, and this is it's more of a DR. I would say, well, it strays on from DR, and the fact that you're taking your database backups is backup retention policies. Driven primarily by the business, and I'm starting to see more and more people say, well, we need this data for 10 years, we need this data for 15 years, we need this data for whatever. So obviously, as you see the database, long-term retention, 10 years, off we go. On premises, okay, 20 years down the line, how am I restoring that?
Yeah, that's a big one.
I know it's slightly off topic on the HADR piece, but when you think about a lot of the work that we're doing to back things up is, well, how do you handle restoring from those old versions? Because obviously with some of us have still got 2000 database systems that we need to deal with, and you're still going to have backups in there that you're going to need to restore at some point. How do you plan for being able to restore sort of that long-term archive data into something so that you can surface it to the business for regulatory requirements or anything like that? Because that's another area of DR that sort of gets overlooked, is that, well, for tax accounting, things like that, I need to restore something from potentially show a position 7 years ago. Well, that's coming out of the backups we've taken. So how am I going to maintain? Do I maintain old versions of SQL Server lurking in the infrastructure? If not, because of the vulnerabilities that may exist in keeping all of that old legacy stuff around, is okay, well, do I keep all the binaries to do an install when I do that, which means you've got to maintain the operating system binary, the installation media, the SQL Server installation media, and things like that, and potentially even backup technologies. You think about using Veritas, and then you may change to Commvault, you may change to Rubrik, and okay, well, how the heck do I restore some of that really old stuff in the event we have to?
That's what cracks me up about enterprise backup technologies, and having to maintain that catalog of data to be able to restore and have that be a dependency on how fast you can recover data, which is crazy.
No, it's easy. It's easy. Just keep the MDF, NDF, and LDF files and open them in a hex header, copy, paste, boom. data system.
Sure.
Sure.
All right, so one final question here, and you can make your answer related to HADR.
Mark, if this is about cheese, I'm going to be upset.
What is
on
Andrew's
what kind of
favorite cheese? No. Um, so what is a feature that you would like to see implemented? If you could have any feature implemented in SQL tomorrow, SQL Server tomorrow, what would it be and why? And this can certainly be an HADR feature, since that's what we're talking about. But whatever.
That's an existential question, man.
Totes, we want to get you talking.
I personally, and it's something I've asked for on numerous occasions, is you look at the way that you can run DAGs in Exchange. Basically, have the ability to put a lag into the replay for AGs. So you might synchronize the log files, but I want to put a 15-minute or a 20-minute delay on them being replayed.
Kind of like log shipping.
Yeah, exactly. It's still one of the biggest. I mean, that's one of the biggest.
Just use log shipping.
Yeah, I know. Use log shipping.
Yeah.
Log shipping is wonderful for that exact reason. Is that
Right. Yeah.
I can have the backups. I've got them over there, but I've got that 2 hours, because when you get that phone call of, have we got a database backup? Pause. What have you done? Well, I ran this and forgot to highlight the where clause. Right. Okay.
Always that wonderful question of, we back up our databases, right? Yes. When was the last backup taken? Why? What's happened?
What have you done?
Yeah. What have you done? Yeah.
Because that's the thing. I mean, you put. I mean, there's everywhere I've put log shipping, I've always put at least 2-hour delay on the restores, because it's about the time that, okay, well, not a problem. We can go back and we can fix that, or I can pull the data out and I can repair it. And I think that's something that would make life a little bit easier, because one of the things that people don't take into account for HADR is typically malicious damage by someone who's got access to a system and wiping data out, updating fields to something or what have you. And then you've got I forgot to highlight the where clause, or as I learned one time to my peril, the ANSI scoping rules for correlated subqueries, that if you get a typo down there and it doesn't return, so basically the inner query errors, it actually returns everything, which when you're doing it in a delete statement and you wipe out the entire inbound order queue for the website, because it's fun. That's when you go.
You speaking from experience.
Yep. That was probably my biggest oops moment.
Yeah.
This delete's taking a long time. How many rows? Oh crap.
Oops.
We've all done it.
Here's a tip. Always alias your correlated subqueries, because if there is a typo down there, it will break and it won't just delete everything.
There you go. Good idea.
So what about you,
that's
Pam?
my favorite.
Hot tip of the day, everyone. Hot tip of the day.
Query aliasing.
Does is it okay if I have a dream feature that's not HADR?
Yeah.
You can have, yeah, absolutely.
I want Hackathon on PMEM so that we can get rid of the transaction log.
Ooh.
If I could do that tomorrow, it would be so much fun and I would love it, and I think it would be a game changer.
I wish I had the
Hi, Brian. You watching?
Yeah.
Right. When they announced, what was it, DAX on PMM like 2 or 3 years ago, like I saw that and I'm like, this could be the biggest deal for relational databases.
Right? Couldn't it? Oh my gosh. Can you imagine if we got rid of the transaction log? I mean, think about a world post transaction log. Can you imagine what that would be like? I can't even. Like, it would be like, think about how many problems you have because of that transaction log. You know, but
That
like
is
the
an
HADR thing, like how would we do HADR without the transaction log? That's the other thing. Like everything relies on it. But it's like, wow, can you imagine what the database engine would look like without a transaction log? Because everything's just on PMEM and you only write it in one place ever. Like that just blows my mind. I think that could be so.
Speaking about, come back to mention the sort of transaction logs and the horrible O word. The one feature I love about Oracle is the parallel reader logs. Given the number of times I've had issues with storage vanishing and taking my transaction log with it, having that sort of parallel logging makes life a lot easier.
So is that literally 2 log streams to 2 separate physical devices?
Yeah, I got two
Okay.
logs and it just streams them out.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's one of the very, very few features of Oracle that I like, and you don't have to pay extra for.
Yet.
I mean, we kind of got a little bit there with accelerated database recovery because we've now got like a redo within the database file itself. So we don't have to rely on the log as heavily. And actually, it is some really cool technology. Speaking of
ADR?
accidentally deleting. Well, ADR, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what accelerated database. No, hang on, what?
Yeah,
recovery.
I'm
That's
sorry.
what-
Oh,
yeah, that's what we do. We only do acronyms here.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we're gonna wrap up here.
We'll wrap up. We need to mention 8KB again, there, Mark.
Yes,
Because,
yes. I'll be more
come on, do-
excited this time as well. Look
We
how
Add
need
a
the
my
link
link.
eyes are.
here.
We need the link. We need the
Yes.
link. Come on, you got to do some
We'll have a
editing.
link right here.
Add link here.
Yes.
Please
a
register
link
for
here.
8KB. 8KB being the largest online SQL Server internals conference. Yeah, check out the website. Look at the schedule. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers. It's going to be a really good time, as it was last year, as Pam can attest to.
It was so much fun. My favorite virtual conference.
Oh, wicked.
Yeah, you can't get much better than that.
We just want to point out that Mark saying it's the biggest online virtual conference was obviously not accurate, so please don't sue us. We're fine.
I said internals conference. to be-
Internals.
All right.
Oh.
Oh, it's a good little asterisk
there
at the
any
end there. Yeah,
other- Oh,
I know how to mark it.
no, there aren't any other.
all the
All
more
right.
reason.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks,
Still
you guys.
so
nice
much.
time.
Thank you.
Great to talk to
Bye
you.
now.
You guys can hang out, obviously.
Yeah.
And we're out.
Go.
Yeah.
No, are we still going? No.